All right. So we are here. Hey, everybody. The room is mad sparse. It's like space in between and things like that. I don't like the feel of that. So if you want to come up, feel free to do that. Welcome to our session. First thing I'll say is this. Like, if you got peoples who are at South by Southwest EDU and they're not here, text them and just text them the following. Just say, like, are you stupid?
Yo, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, this is about to be the one. All right? So I'm Chris Emdin. And I'm glad to be back at South by Southwest EDU. It's one of my favorite conferences. And you know, when I was asked to come back and do something this year, I said, I don't want to do something by myself. I want to bring the people that I adore with me. I adore them not because they're just like beautiful people, but these are my friends, but also my colleagues, and probably the utmost experts in their respective fields. And you'll find out why we're here together. The title of the talk is Ratchetdemic Street Scholar. Ratchetdemic, brilliant book, I know the author, you should buy it. It's about existing at the intersections of ratchetness and being academic, ways that we construct new identities that give us a pathway towards freedom. And it's Ratchetdemic Street Scholar, because Dr. Jones has written another amazing book called Street Scholar about how to exist as a scholar by having your ear and your heart and your soul connected to the streets where young folks are from, right? And it's called A Path Towards Healing. And why it's important for us to talk about healing is because in contemporary education, healing is the topic du jour. You go anywhere, people who are doing violence by young people are articulating their practices and saying, let's heal. I'm like, yo fam, you killing them daily, talking about healing. And so my take is that you cannot talk about healing until you understand what you're healing from. And these are folks who understand the sicknesses that exist within our society and our schools. But we're not gonna sit here and just offer what's going wrong. We're also going to offer you a pathway towards possibility through a Ratchetdemic and Street Scholar framework. Are y'all ready for the sauce or not? Right? So, opening question. If we collectively agree that schools are broken, I'm going to shoot it to Dr. Wells first, right? Mm-hmm. And I asked Dr. Wells to be here because Dr. Wells works with the Veterans Affairs for the country, and he works directly with folks who have undergone severe trauma.
Absolutely.
And the reason why we connect is because I've interviewed young folks in schools who've gone through schooling, and how they describe their experiences in school sounds like they're dealing with trauma.
Absolutely.
So I went to an expert on trauma. I'm like, well, these kids are responding violently. These kids are they don't want to be here. They have these responses to their experiences in school.
Sure.
And he started telling me, yo, Chris, they're undergoing severe trauma. This is PTSD.
Absolutely.
Poor teaching and schools disorder. So Dr. Wells, could you articulate for us how your experience in PTSD in a conventional sense, connects to the experiences of young folks in schools right now?
Yeah, so I think I view it in a couple of ways. One being a student who was in a severely broken public school system, and then now kind of crossing a bridge toward being, I guess, a healer, working with severely traumatized veterans, but having been a teacher on a college campus in between, right, at an HBCU. And a part of what I'm seeing is students responding with secondary trauma. So what we learn is that individuals who are traumatized themselves, and I would say that that's administrations, school systems, families, teachers, when they in fact are exhibiting trauma symptoms, people who have to live in spaces with them develop trauma symptoms as well, or they develop trauma reactions. If you have to deal with someone who is angry on the very edge of always exploding, you develop a means of recognizing their body language. You develop a means of understanding when they're going to shout at you. You develop a means of understanding when the attack is going to come. When I hear and see about our students acting out, I'm wondering how much of that is a response to our teachers who in fact aren't preparing space for the behavior that they see in students. What of this trauma system has impacted students to behave in the way that they're behaving, and thus is leading to these students doing what they're doing? And we don't then bring about any correction or healing in trauma by responding to it in kind. So when we are disciplining students in the way that we are, when we're talking about them as a problem, as opposed to identifying their symptoms, we're seeing some of the problems that we're seeing come about.
Right, and then what we do is we problematize the students and not the system. So
Absolutely.
what do we do? Put them in the save room, at least in New York City Department of Ed, put them in that room. And so what ends up happening is we problematize the child and put them in, call them the XYZ, and then change the course of their career, because we're like, this is your problem, instead of thinking about the system. But also the educators in the room, we end up being in a space also like, if you're in the space of trauma, you're also in the space of hypervigilance.
Absolutely.
And toxic stress.
Absolutely.
And you cannot be present, you cannot be your best and full self if you are constantly worried that something's gonna happen.
And you don't bring about a change in trauma unless you remove the stigma of the diagnosis, right? So we have to come to teachers, to systems and say, okay, listen, this is a system of symptoms that we're seeing. It's the symptoms that we treat, not the diagnosis, not the name itself. So we have to identify that, what the symptoms are, and then go about bringing that work.
I do think, though, what has happened is we've decided, like you said, they're labeled, trauma-informed, became a word and term that we were all using. We forgot what it meant.
Absolutely.
And so what ends up happening is we're now looking for the problem. We're looking for trauma. Like, where can I find trauma?
Talk to them.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Instead of focusing on healing, which is moving forward. So we focus on the trauma, and we're like, I can't say this word because I need to be trauma-informed.
Right.
You got to live the work.
Right.
You got to change how you move in these spaces in order for you not to traumatize folks.
In treating trauma, the place that we've come to within the field itself is to understand that you, in fact, don't want to simply be problem-focused. You want to be strength-based. So what are we telling not only students, but teachers and their families and their systems and educators themselves, conferences and spaces like this? What are we telling them about students' strengths? And that's where I think some of hip-hop comes in. We'll get to it, but we'll talk about how people will describe their symptoms and describe a lot of what it is they're living with in their own words. We'll get to that point.
Let me get to Dr. Jones right now. First of all, let me just time out. Did y'all catch all the bars so far? Just so you didn't, you can't be trauma-informed and always be looking for trauma, number one. Number two, you can't look at trauma in young folks without looking at the trauma in systems. I ain't say it, they said it, but I just want y'all to get the underlying joints. Dr. Jones, so they described a very complex problem here. I want you to talk experientially and from what you've witnessed, the ways that systems cause those who teach in these transgressive ways to go through trauma. And you can share experientially or you can share anecdotally, but I want you to talk about how that sits with those who teach.
Hey, y'all. I'm Angel. My pronouns are she, her, and AI. I feel like I have to say that I'm from Brooklyn because these three are from the Bronx, and at some point they're going to tell you, so
And look, I was going to be real agnostic this evening.
Lies.
I really was until you did that. But okay, we'll see.
Okay.
Hey, man. So my work looks at the impacts of racism on the mental health of Black students, Black faculty, and Black staff in higher ed. So my work specifically looks at racial battle fatigue, which talks about both the psychological and the physiological consequences of experiencing racial trauma. Right. So some of those psychological consequences are increased depression, increased anxiety, increased suicidal thoughts, but then there are also these physical manifestations in our body, right? So research is showing that we experience elevated heart rate, increased blood pressure, tension headaches, stomach ulcers, right? All of these physical things that are happening to our bodies because of the racial trauma that we're experiencing. So we as educators are experiencing it, but our students are experiencing it as well, and us not acknowledging that is really making it hard for them to heal. It's making it hard for us to heal. And those things are happening because of what's happening within the system, but also what happens with outside of the system, right? Like our students and ourselves, we bring what we experience in the world into the classroom, right? Because we're supposed to bring our whole selves, at least we believe, and bring in our whole selves in, right? So when Tyree Nichols was murdered, right, like that impacted me as an educator, right? That impacts my students, and us ignoring that and the impact that that's having, right? Ignoring the racial trauma that that's causing them and causing us makes it impossible for us to heal. We have to have these conversations.
Can I add also that when we show up as our full selves.
Say that again. Say that again.
When we show up as our full selves, me, Dena Simmons from the Bronx, because you started it, Black, unapologetically Black, in a white space, folks don't know how to handle that. And so for the teachers in the room, when we show up in these spaces as our full authentic selves, and they're like, you can't wear your hair like that. You can't wear those pants. Don't use yo. But that's how I speak. That's how the hair grows out of my head. And so what ends up happening by showing up in our full authentic selves, we become targets. We become the victims of institutional bullying. So sometimes in doing the work of healing others, we are fighting battles. Because we are trying to create cover for our kids. And I think what happens is we need to stop and take care of ourselves so that we can take care of our students, but we need to do that with each other in collective healing opportunities. Because what happens also, the way whiteness works, it would much rather we not be together. Because there is power in numbers. And so what did I learn when I went to my predominantly white boarding school? Every time the faculty members were just checking in when all the black girls were hanging out, I learned that we weren't supposed to be together. All right, so then we end up doing the work of whiteness, sometimes inadvertently, because we are just trying to survive. And I think that is a level of weight and trauma that so many black folks, and I can only speak for the black experience, although we did talk about the time I thought I was Latina. That's a whole nother conversation for another day.
We did.
We're gonna have to go to therapy on that at another time. But I just wanted to say, just own that, take care of yourselves, and like check in with yourselves, because a lot of us are carrying our own trauma, going into healing spaces, but have not done the work of healing ourselves.
I want to add to that real quick, sister, because I think it's an important component when we're talking about healing. Literally what I do with 90% of my time is to work in therapeutic spaces. Individual, group, marital, family, right? And one thing that's always consistent about healing, especially for people of color, systems that serve people of color, is that the healing process is a messy one. And anytime I'm brought into these spaces, I'm always amazed at how very cleansed the space is. At the number of times there is applause as opposed to like outright crying when we're talking about the healing process. Like we are not attacking the unwellness that exists with us. And I'm wondering at what point we get to the shouting and we get to the other shit. Right? Are we allowed to curse in this space?
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
Let me build on that real quick. Let me build on that real quick. And this is where I want us all to collectively get to. So from what Dena said, what is striking to me is that black gathering on its own is a freedom space.
Absolutely.
And if black gathering is a freedom space and schools themselves are oppressive structures,
correct,
what we can collectively do as educators is create more spaces for black children to just gather together.
And those have to be loud. Those have to be open and free.
And linger together. But here's a second piece, which is really ill, and I'm gonna toss back to y'all. Not only must they be able to gather, they must be able to gather and turn up. And that's really interesting when we're talking about us gathering in this way and in the way y'all are gathering, right? So we're talking about black freedom looking like gathering, lingering, and free expression as we exist in a conference where we're all sitting in rows, taking notes quietly, and waiting for the salient points to clap on. Do y'all get the hypocrisy? So the idea is that every time that we gather, given that the system is sick, we must intentionally take on outward expressive ways of healing as a way to interrupt the cycle of normalcy that is just sitting down and paying attention.
Absolutely.
So somebody in here clapped as a signal. Somebody in here wanted to clap and was like, I don't quite know if that's all right to do right now. And we're saying that black clapping, y'all with me? Black overlapping speech. When Dr. Wells spoke, I was like, snapping. Right? That those things are not just performative, that they are actually mechanisms for us to be able to heal in real time.
Absolutely.
And it cannot be seen as anecdotes. They should be seen as strategy for healing. When you relegate a strategy to an anecdote, you dismiss it. And we're saying the way we show up henceforth is in this full black freedomness. And we invite you to do the same. You heard?
Right. I feel like we just have to start like, where the music at?
Yeah.
Where the twerking at? Because I need some lessons.
I was gonna say I am not a professional twerker, y'all.
But do y'all catch the vibe? And it's a process, right? It's a process for somebody who's sitting in a room right now to say, oh my God, what am I witnessing? Or what I've witnessed is okay for a conference, but it wouldn't be okay in my classroom. right? It's to make those leaps to turn this into a pedagogical practice. So now let me turn back to my family. I'm gonna go to Dr. Simmons on this one, because your work around SEL, for me, like, you know, when I read your work, I just shake because it's so good. Can you talk about the ways that SEL has been positioned as a way to heal, but then concurrently has become co-opted as a way to reinforce brokenness?
Right. Listen, don't get me started. Listen, nobody could fire me anymore. So first of all,
Go.
If you don't know what she's talking about,
Go.
Google the details, you heard?
Google the details. Yeah.
Yeah.
First of all, I gotta tell a story. Two things.
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk about professionalism, and I gotta tell a story, and I'm gonna get to answer your question. There was a moment I was in Ithaca. I was sharing the stage with Zaretta Hammond and Dr. Bettina Love and Lavelle, who was the superintendent. And I literally cursed on stage. I said the F word. And I was like, I just don't give a f. That's what I said. Because I had got to the point at that old place where I was, rhymes with kale.
Fuck them people, bro.
Yo, it also rhymes with stale. But go ahead, do what you do.
And I was like, I just don't have it in me anymore to pretend. Right? Because when I read the review, someone said that wasn't professional. I was like, who gets to freaking define professional? Why am I not professional in the way I show up naturally? I'm from the Bronx. We got flavor.
Absolutely. Say that again.
I'm from the Bronx and we got flavor.
Heard?
I'm glad all four of us up here front of Bronx. I love it.
Right.
Blasphemy, the disrespect.
So you see that humor is part of healing. And I'm at a place right now, from that place that rhymes with stale, that I can talk about it. But it wasn't always like this. I left after, like, I was attacked viciously over Zoom bombing. Called the N-word, my life was threatened. And I had a moment where I could have gone back to work after that happened and do what my elders said, just push through it, just keep moving, because that's what we do. And at one point, when we do that, we teach people how to treat us.
Yep.
And so I was like, I'm more than my labor. So I will call them and tell them I need time to heal. I took 7 months off.
Yeah.
Paid.
Yeah.
Come on.
Okay.
Yo,
But let me just, okay, yes.
'cause y'all
I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
Because right now, my sister, right here, and only if you feel comfortable,
Yeah.
and then I'll answer your question.
Yeah.
Only if you feel comfortable. She's like, oh, shit. You know, you've been going through your own stuff. So how are you, sis?
I think Chris wants you to answer the question.
No.
So check this out. I think that there's a particular way that black women have to take on the labor of having to be okay.
Absolutely.
And there's a particular viciousness
Yeah.
to the assaults that you've gone through, right? Like,
Right.
so everybody on the stage, so here's the thing I want y'all to also understand. What connects us is not just our Bronxness. What connects us
I
also...
told y'all it was coming, right?
But what
I'm experiencing trauma.
I can help you to cope. I got you. You're good.
But what folks don't understand when I brought us together is this, that what also connects us is that we've all also individually been victimized by a power structure that has sent us notes and emails and Zoom bombs and racial, so that's another thing that connects us. But the way that Dr. Wells has handled that and the way that I've been able to handle that is
Very
through our
different.
ability to lean into our Bronx and our maleness and our black maleness, right?
Correct.
Like, you know, I could pull up and be like, y'all really want smoke? You don't want smoke.
Right.
Like, if you're gonna send a note, send an Addy. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, otherwise,
Right.
if you ain't saying it directly to my face, I don't respect it, right? So, but I could engage in that way, leaning into my black male identity. There's a particular way that our sisters can, but have been positioned not able to even utilize that as a mechanism. So I want y'all to talk through, and Doc, we're gonna get to you in a minute too,
No
right?
worries.
But I
No worries.
want y'all to talk about that nuance. The sophistication of the methods that ensure that you're broken, and how you've been able to navigate through that and heal enough to be here with us. Can I hear about that?
racism is trash, y'all. Like, it's, so I'm a public scholar. I use social media as an educational tool. So I'm very in the public, and because of that, racist white men get in their feelings a lot. So I get death threats on a regular basis, hate mail on a regular basis. I recently published an op-ed with Times Higher Ed that's talking about the racial battle fatigue that Black faculty and staff experience. And the white folks on the right got mad. So Fox News wrote about me, the Post, Daily Mail, all these people. So you can like legit Google me right now, not as a flex, as data, because I'm a researcher. And like just like within
Can it be data and a flex though?
It can be both. Yeah, it can be both. Yeah.
Hey man, I was talking to my mom. I was like, "Mommy, I made it to Fox News, so that low key means I made it. All I need next is for them to ban my book, and then son, it's a wrap." But yeah, so like I've gotten at least 100 emails within the last 48 hours saying that they want to lynch me, the N-word, all these different things. And I think about wanting to clap back, right? Like what that looks like. But my work, like I said, is about microaggressions, right? And I talk about how Black women respond to it. And for the most part, we don't respond to microaggressions. And the number one reason is the fear of perpetuating the angry Black woman stereotype. So it's just like they're already coming for me if I respond, even if it's as gracious and PC as possible, it still further perpetuates that stereotype. And the fact that we even have to be mindful of that, right? Like we have to have this kind of internal dialogue with ourselves.
The epitome of gaslighting, right?
Right, like it gets intense, right? So I'm gonna lie, there are times I'm like, you know what? I got time today. I'm gonna respond, right? But there's sometimes like what's happening right now where it does get scary, right? Like I would love to pull up, but I'm like, nah, I'm gonna let Chris pull up for me because I'm just not doing that.
Well,
right?
can we talk about that too, though, right? That part of our responsibility, if you're in this room, is to be able to have folks be free enough to name the moments where they're being assaulted in that way, and that folks who are in your community need to be able to pull up. Like she needs to be able to feel comfortable enough to say, my bro gonna pull up, and her bro pulls up, right? And I think that's part of healing as well. You're able to heal when you know that you're not healing individually. That we heal, if somebody sends her an email, they send me an email, right? And if she doesn't feel she has the capacity to pull up, then I could be like, send to Addie. You know what I mean? Like, and I think again, Black collectivity and gathering together is a means for our shared healing. You know what I mean? Did I cut you off, beloved? Like, Dena, lean in.
So, you know, I'm sorry, sis. Me too. And this is where collective is important. And I think what happens as Black women, like someone asked me when I was going through it, and I continue to go through it, was, what do you need? And I said, I don't know. And it's because when I reflected on that, I don't have practice on people asking me as a Black woman what I need. Because the world expects for me to carry it. And I have done it very well. And you know what? The world also expects for me not to hurt. And so what I have been conditioned to do is to not show my hurt, to not be vulnerable, because I'm supposed to be strong. And when you're vulnerable, what you learn is that people will come and take advantages. You can't be nice. So it's always like this tension all the time that we're trying to navigate in these spaces, which will bring me back to answering your question.
Come on. Full circle, y'all.
Full circle, which is the way we use frameworks or constructs or whatever as healing, we always have to interrogate. I always say, like, what is the genesis and origin of social emotional learning? What's the history of it? Do we know how it started? It started in New Haven, Connecticut. And it started in a room where mostly people did not look like me. So I always say, think about that. Who lives in New Haven, Connecticut? What's the demographics there? Go ahead, tell me who they. No New Haven? Y'all clearly don't know New Haven.
Depends on where you go. If you hit the campus, it's
you,
all
okay,
white.
if you're on
but
campus,
New Haven is the hood.
Outside of the
campus is Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Jamaicans, is all folks of color. So there's a whole gentrification thing. And I'm like, so you don't know the people who you're trying to save. And if you're trying to save me, you disempower me. Because now what you've said is I cannot save myself.
Facts.
And so I think when we think about social emotional learning and we position it as the healer, or when everyone discovered racism in 2020 as like how we get to racial justice. I'm like, you have to interrogate what this thing is.
Yeah.
And you know, that I always tell people you can't be culturally responsive, you can't be emotionally intelligent without being culturally responsive. That came from sitting in the office at a place called the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and being like, I really think you need to be culturally responsive because these folks got their hands in my hair. And so in the sense that we have to interrogate the institutions and the practices that we say we're gonna implement. Because sometimes unknowingly we become, like I'm gonna tell you, agents of whiteness. We become agents of harm. Because we're like, they said this was good, did you interrogate it? So when I started to interrogate social emotional learning and say, wait, walking around looking at different campuses around the nation and folks are like, well, we use SEL for that classroom because those kids really need to learn to calm down. So you want to use SEL so that they shut up? You want to use SEL so the black kids don't gather and feel joy? You have to interrogate that. Why and for whom is SEL for? So I started to say, listen, if you don't apply a racial justice, abolitionist, anti-oppressive lens to whatever you do, social emotional learning, it will easily become white supremacy with a hug.
Absolutely.
Yo, Dr. Wells, that was bars. I want to say two things, and then Doc, I'm gonna come to you.
Okay.
I think it's also important for us to identify the ways that phrases or terms like SEL are, as you always say, white supremacy with a hug. But I also like the inability for the systems to understand that the ways that we heal just look different, right? So like a very Eurocentric method for healing is like, sit down, breathe deeply, this co-option of like indigenous traditions, like sit and cross your legs, and that seems to be the only path towards healing.
Right.
What if I told you that black barbecues is social emotional healing? Like, you know what I mean? Like a good turn up, like, man, that's a release. And so we have to also take the title, the frame, and then flip the joint. Like, what are the kids are all listening to hip hop music and dancing in the back of the class. What are you doing? Social emotional learning, right? So like, we have to reclaim the thing to make it look like our thing.
Right.
As a psychologist, right? Because, psychological frameworks are oftentimes used.
The best psychologist in the world. That's how.
No, period. I know that. That's why you're here.
Absolutely.
As the best psychologist in the world, could you talk about the ways that psychological terms, phrases, approaches have been co-opted by educational folks in ways that are not what they were intended to do?
Yeah.
Like, talk through that with us.
Yeah, we have an entire set of kind of meetings in the back where we talk about a lot of the performative wellness we see out front. Right, and the performative wellness is, well, I've learned all of these concepts and here's how I'm applying it in the classroom. And very often the approach that we take feels like it's incredibly hard work to people. If you don't set goals in treatment, you're not in treatment. If you haven't, with your family system,
hold up, bring it back. Beloved, you can't speed past the bars.
Okay.
Bring that one back real quick.
So if you haven't set goals in treatment, if you can't note your progress, so if you aren't able to say, here is the thing, and you do it in class as teachers already, correct? You have all of these places that you want your students to get to. You don't really monitor those well. We know that as well. That's how we know that the wellness piece ends up being compromised. But everything that you do for your students has to have them in mind. As a psychologist, if I don't go to my patients, especially me, I work with traumatized humans, right? Quick story. Have a veteran, probably year 3 in my career. I come around a corner, he has guns in his hand. We're in the VA hospital, federal facility. So I'm basically in my head like, well, this is how I die, right? This is a vet, he's a Marine, so it's over for me. He's just gonna shoot. And he was like, nah, doc, man, I wanted to let you know I'm not gonna kill myself. I brought all this shit in. You can call me next time, right? But a part of what I had indicated to him was no matter what space you are in, I have room for it. If you have to shout at me, I have room for it. Whatever way you have to tell me you feel angry today, I have room for it. Whatever way you have to tell me about anxiety and nervousness, even if it's coming out as rage, I have room for it. So if we're in the space of creating well spaces for students, we have to have their voice first. We have to set goals in their words. And we have to be the family system, so we have to determine how they're making progress, and then we have to report that progress back to them. It doesn't matter what we outside of that classroom believe about the progress that you've made in any real way. If we're actually talking about wellness, we're talking about the work that we're doing, correct? My nigga.
Okay. You hit me with a lot there, and I don't want to respond directly. I want to lob to the sisters, but I want to say one thing. This concept of making room is oftentimes positioned as being in antithesis to high expectations or academic rigor. So I think part of the weaponizing of neo-indigenous or indigenous approaches to healing is that it's classified as being outside of learning.
Right.
So it's like, you know, you're gonna have the kids write raps. What about their science content? Can y'all talk through the ways that our healing mechanisms can concurrently equate to academic success or educational benchmarks or whatever other thing it is? And hint, you're exemplars of that by your very presence. But can you talk through how that happens in the work? Like, talk through the complications that systems create that make it seem like as though our modes of our expression are outside of the scope of being intellectual or academic, how they've not been able to understand the depth and the complexity of being ratchetdemic.
Could we just redefine success?
Talk. Okay.
So for me, I'm like, you gonna make room for me today. So I did everything I was supposed to do to get to where I was supposed to go to, and only for them to tell me, you do not belong here. So what I realized is I nearly killed myself. This is what we don't talk about. In order to be successful on very narrow terms of success, we nearly kill ourselves. That overwork, that burnout, and especially as a Black person with a mother who works all the time, because I have in my blood that my worth was connected to my labor. So I had to detach from the stereotypes that would be placed on me when I say no, I'm making boundaries. Once I make a boundary, someone's gonna be, oh, she lazy. Right? But what if we redefine success? So for me, I've redefined success. Success for me for a very long time was get all the awards, get to this great school, get into this fellowship, do the things. I did that. And I have all the scars on my body to show for it. And we don't talk enough about the scars. We talk about the success story, but not about the scars story.
Absolutely.
And why? Because I was trying to get to this destination of success that kept moving closer, the closer I got to it. Because that's how white supremacy works. So there's always a redefinition of success that will exclude me in order for the positioning of those in power to maintain power. So in a sense, you're killing yourself for something you might not get. Right. So for me, success is you're gonna make room for me. And rest. And joy. And care. And love. And healing. And interacting from the heart. Like if you come to me, you try to network me, that's not how we're gonna connect.
Listen.
I wanna know who you are.
Right.
I wanna know, like...
You know, folks who don't know who they are don't know how to connect with you with who you are or they are. That's another piece of it too. I'm gonna go to you, Doc, in a second, but Dr. Jones, can you talk to us about how your work, and particularly that brilliant book, Street Scholar, how does street scholarship serve as an intervention that is what Dr. Simmons is talking about? Like how does Street Scholar become the way that you're like, you know what, I ain't worried about your benchmark. Like talk us through that framework as a method for healing.
So when I think about being a street scholar, for those who haven't read the book yet, but you will because you will buy it because it's here, a street scholar is someone whose mission, movement, and motivation are rooted in the community, right? So we are in the academy, but we are not of the academy. We don't do this work for the academy. We do it for the community. The academy claims to do it for the community, but then doesn't make that work accessible to them, and we're changing the way we do that. So for me, being a street scholar is being authentic, it's being unapologetic, being able to walk into a space as your unapologetic self, right? So the way I talk to y'all is how I talk to my mama, is how I talk to my students. Like, I show up. I'm from Brooklyn, so I say son. Like, that's just kind of who it, why y'all hating so hard?
I didn't even say nothing. I didn't even say nothing.
Anyway, but so I think about, right, that making room for yourself, right, not waiting for folks to make room for you. And I think when I think about room, right, having space to not be strong, right, to feel like you don't have to be strong, right. So I talked earlier about the angry black woman stereotype, but the strong black woman trope is equally dangerous.
Absolutely.
Joan Morgan wrote a great book called When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost. A hip-hop feminist breaks it down. And one of her chapters is SBW, Strong Black Woman, and talks about, because we feel like we have to be this person, we don't get the mental health support that we need, right? We don't make boundaries. We don't take time to heal. We don't take time to rest. But when I think about what Dena was saying, right, about us killing ourselves, during my doc program, I was struggling with racial battle fatigue so bad that I ended up in the hospital. And even though I was researching RBF, I still wasn't able to identify it in myself. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I sat back and I was like, yo, like, what is happening to me, right? Because everything that was happening, like the aches I was having in my body, my heart rate, my depression, I'm like, oh, I'm a doc student. That's just how it is, right? But then realizing, so I have a pacemaker because I already have a heart condition, but there was one particular professor who was super duper racist, and every time my phone, the notification would go off that I had an email, my pacemaker would go off because I thought it was him, right? So just constant state of like tightness and anxiety and hypervigilance, and going through that, I was like bumped at, like, I'm not gonna let them kill me, right? And I think in that moment is when it switched for me. I was like, I'm going to be my authentic self. I'm not gonna be who they think I should be or want me to be. So when I did my dissertation defense, I did it as a spoken word piece. I was like, bump your standards or your methods or how you think this should be. Like, I'm going to become Dr. Jones in the most authentic way that I can be. And to me, there's healing in that, right? There's liberation and freedom in being able to show up as your authentic self. So because I create that space in my class, students get to show me their brilliance in any way that makes sense for them. Right? So just because we don't conform to a certain way of being doesn't mean that we are not brilliant. It doesn't mean that we are not creating academically rigorous spaces for our students. I would argue that we create a space that allows them to be even more brilliant because they don't have to contain it to fit into what we think it should be.
Yo, one more thing, just to add on that, is this also has to be coupled with a recognition that the ways of expressing that are deemed as unsophisticated or unintelligent actually are more sophisticated than the traditional benchmarks. So that, she's like, well, I did my defense as a spoken word piece. Somebody gonna be like, oh my gosh, a spoken word piece? Why not, a paper with 5 billion citations, which she has done also. But I think what's important is you have to then ask the person who's judging the work, can you do it? I want y'all to understand this. There's gotta be a moment of role reversal. Right? So when somebody says, why are you having the kids rap about science? I'm like, can you clap on beat? So I'm just saying, like, so if you're gonna demean that form of expression, then, I'm not judging you for your rhythm achievement gaps. I'm loving you anyway and working with you through the process. And so part of the work has to be for a redefinition. Y'all with me still? That healing also looks like a redefining, right? That allows our methods of engagement to be the benchmark. Sometimes the babies don't underperform because the standards are too high. Sometimes it hurts their back because they're too low. Sometimes when they're reaching over to do something so simplistic, I'm like, I don't want to do this, it's too low. So our work and our way is actually the reaching. And so healing looks like redefining. Dr. Wells, could you talk to us a little bit about redefinition?
Yeah, so I want to say this, and it's an idea that I want for all of you not only to take with you, I want you to start practicing it, right? The very best thing that you can do for yourself with regard to your mental health is to make a goal to disappoint everyone around you. And what I promise you, and it's what our students carry, right? They're trying to bring a version of themselves that's supposed to be present in a classroom with them that day, and it has to fight off whoever is the opposition, deal with teachers whose expectations may be, deal with the family that may not know how to support them in a space where they are being brilliant. What you can do as an example for yourself is to make the determination that whatever version of yourself you are projecting, that others are projecting their meaning onto, because they are, right? Because they are determining for you, especially for the sisters here, a moment with you. You absolutely have to understand, black and brown women in particular, how you are going about holding up entire parts of this system and families and communities by simply saying, I refuse to fail. So any failure that does happen, it rests firmly on my shoulders and back, and I have to keep pushing it up. Here's all of this detritus that is right upon you. I have to keep pushing that up. I haven't taken the time to set that load down. Back to all of you. You absolutely are going to have to make the determination that on some day, most days, take time, vacations from the version of you that is supposedly best, and be the version of you that is actual, no matter what others are projecting. When people say the authentic self, what I often wonder is if they understand how very messy the authentic self has to look. The authentic self, almost by definition, has to be imperfect because we're human.
Talk your
talk. It has to have instances where the most authentic self is loud, in instances where it's vulnerable, in instances where it wants to completely avoid others and separate, where it has to recharge. There has to be that version of you in you because it's already there. So we don't get to a place where we redefine until we start to live in a way that allows us to say, no, if I do this differently, I'll develop the vocabulary that I can then give to others.
Dr. Simmons, how do you live that differently? So part of the reason why I have my, again, ain't they dope, first and foremost? I think part of the beauty of your existence to me is that you are very intentional about your not give a fuckness. How do you?
The Bronx.
Well, it is the Bronx, ain't it? At the end of the day,
we're right back to that.
That might be the answer to it all.
We're right back to that.
Just for the record, before there was Wakanda, people were throwing their X's up.
This is
but could you talk us through, in all seriousness, right? Could you talk us through not the process, but the existence, like what sits within you? Like I want people in here to be able to be like, you know what? She's arrived at a place, or she's still becoming in a place, but it's really evident. There must be a process beneath that on a daily. Is it something you can articulate, or is it just a thing?
There is always a point where we break. Do you know how much weight and effort it takes to be the version of yourself that someone defined for you? So, like I said, there was that moment where I told you in Ithaca when I'm just on stage like, I don't give a beep. That was a sign. But there were also other signs. There were health signs, right? But there were also, just exhaustion. I'm just too tired. I'm just too tired to have to care. I'm too tired to give a fuck. That is real too. After a while, someone talks to me, I was in the bathroom the other day and someone was like, well, after this age, you will not give a fuck anymore. She looked at me, she's like, but for you, I don't know what happened to you.
You got there early.
Yeah, you got there early. And it was, you know what the thing is? At the end of the day, you have to live your life.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you're the one who wakes up every single day to live your life. So what I'm saying is, the reason why I live the way I do is because I'm exhausted. I was exhausted. I didn't have it in me anymore. It actually was detrimental to my health to contain myself. And our students do that. We talk about healing. We have to talk about the limitations, the containment. That's work, that's labor, that's emotional labor, that's physical labor, that's social. So I just don't have it in me anymore. I expended all of it for 7 years at an institution that every day reminded me, oh, you worked your whole life to this?
I just peeped that it's so dope, but we pass and people got questions. By the way, if you got questions, go to the app, engage, Slido.
Yeah, go to Slido, hit the engage button when you go into Slido, and that way you can put your question.
Yeah, you know the vibes, like do what you do.
But wait, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why are we following the rules?
Not because we want some people to ask questions,
Okay.
but I also want to add this. I just want to add a little color to your joint, which is so lit, right? Because I think a lot of people miss this part also. You had to get to the point of utter exhaustion before you got to the point where you're like, you know what? I'm gonna just do what I do. Be clear that there are folks whose entire existence, without having to be exhausted at all, is coming into the world knowing they could do what the F they do, right? We see exemplars all the time in the social political spectrum. We got congressmen who just lie their way. They're like, I'm gonna just lie. I'm gonna just say the F word whenever I feel like. I'm a governor of a state. I'm gonna just say stupid things.
Right.
And some folks don't have to get to exhaustion before they find their freedom of expression.
Correct.
And so if other folks can do it just existing, then we must demand to do the same. And now we're gonna get to some questions because folks got questions.
Sure.
Thank you for reminding me, sis. So first question is how do you begin that journey of
Okay.
They coming in.
You gotta
right
warn.
now.
You gotta warn us. You gotta warn us.
Oh, fam, it's like 95 questions.
Yeah.
I work at a predominantly black elementary school, but we have 0 black male teachers. What can I change about my school culture to recruit black males?
Where's Sharif at?
Yeah.
Do y'all know Sharif Al-Mekki? Yeah. That's my man. So you know the vibes. It's all community. He's probably saying the same things we're saying right now. The first thing I'll say to this, you cannot invite black males, nor will they come to an institution if you're inviting them back to the site of trauma.
Correct.
So if you want to have black males represented in your institution, you've got to create an institution that makes black males feel like they want to come to it. And it's not complex, y'all. The black males who you want to come back first are the students who are in the school right now.
Correct.
So if you create a healing space for the black boys in the school right now, they will come back as black men to keep recreating that space. That's the first part. The second thing is like, it's also not about recruitment. I'm sorry, I'm gonna get to y'all in a minute, but this one got me hot. It's also not about recruitment because check this out. You could recruit a black man to a school who's a black man in phenotype, but not one in soul.
Correct.
You know, we got a lot of lanes
Yeah.
out here in this mix. So be intentional about saying what you want and ensuring that you ain't got a whole I got a whole chat. Y'all, you need to buy Ratchetdemic. They ran out over here, but you can order online. You know, you don't want an Oreo as your exemplar of black maleness, right? You want black excellence in its full authentic way. So we'll answer that later. I'm gonna shut up and then I'm gonna go to y'all. What can white people do to assist black teachers that have suffered workplace trauma? Y'all.
One of y'all better say something before I dive in, man. All right, so white folks absolutely have to stop sideline reporting what is happening and then congratulating themselves for things that are performative. White folks have the general power to improve conditions in every workspace. And a part of it is putting skin and blood in the game. If you know that there are black people, men and women, teachers, students, families that are being terrorized in your space, whoop somebody's ass who looks like you behind that. Literally form the coalitions that you have to form in the space where they exist and address those things, and then emphasize to your black colleagues, listen, man, is there any way that I can donate leave time to you? How can I help you to see to your wellness in ways that are real and actual? How can I change how I communicate with you? How can I go about making it so that this workspace feels safer to you? You're actually going to have to determine how much of a real investment you're going to have, because healing in itself, we can't simply, I think, generally talk about it. We have to act it out, right? And we have to be accountable for what we do. Again, setting goals, noting progress, but you're going to have to do something to change that space.
And white folks need to show up ratchet as well.
Absolutely.
Like, there's white folks who are in here. It's not just black folks performing. It's a lot of white folks who are here at South by Southwest EDU who about that life. They understand, wokeness and all the things. And then when you get back with your peoples, you forget all the things that you talked about and you showed up at.
They're here with us.
Yeah, they're here.
They're here with us.
You're here riding out. And when you get back around your people, you put on the white coat again and you act like Ratchetdemic is not for black folks only. Because you lean into your white righteousness as well. So sometimes you ain't got to be like us, but you got to be a real person. Real recognize real. I don't want you to be like me. I want you to like me, but don't be like me. But be like yourself. And some of y'all don't even know how to be like yourselves either. Sisters, thoughts?
We got some other questions here.
Okay.
So, yeah.
You know why y'all pick the questions? Y'all want to pick the ones you like?
can't see that far.
Oh, you can't?
Or she can't.
Okay,
I'm going to hold my...
I got you. If
Okay,
you,
so how do you begin that journey of radical Black healing when you're rooted in white spaces? How do you establish the professionalism and boundaries?
We're rooted in the community. We ain't rooted in no white spaces. I just want to put that
No,
out.
but y'all get the whole joint. Like, I'm sorry, like, if the system is trash, show up. I don't want to make it. I don't want to make it seem like it's simple. Like, you know, like, how do you begin a journey? It ain't a journey.
Right.
You gotta just go. Like, one day you gotta be like, you know what?
one foot in front
Right.
of the other.
Yo,
Absolutely.
you know what? Yo, you got, like, if you're in an institution, you got a PhD. I got a PhD. You know, you got a credential. I got a credential. You got a job. I got a job. But you ain't got no swag, and I got swag. Right? You don't know what it's like to walk through the borough of the Bronx and smell crucifitos on the Grand Concourse. I do, right? You don't know what it's like to have to struggle through heating up the apartment with the oven on Kingsbridge.
Yes, sir.
I do. So all the things you got, I got, plus some because of the beauty of my experience. And you've got to use the beauty of your, I'm sorry, I get hyped.
Listen,
you got to, matter of fact, fuck it. You got to use the beauty of your,
Go.
like, you've got to
Go.
use the beauty of your
Yeah.
experience as a badge of honor. Like the things that make you, like Nas said on a new album, like the things that shape me will emerge you. You know what that means? Like the things that I went through that shaped me to be who I am, you don't have the capacity to even know what it feels like.
Right.
So now you've got to own that thing that you went through as a badge of honor. And look at folks who ain't got it like, damn, I feel so sorry for you. The role reversal begins with a recognition of the excellence that's a function of your existence. Once you understand that, ooh, y'all, once you understand the essence of blackness is the ultimate rigor. Right? My existence in this brown skin in a world not designed for me to survive, but yet I am here. Once that becomes, it's so much more complicated than a degree. So once you own that and sit with that, you can't allow, that's the journey begins with recognition.
Brother, can I tag in real quick? Because
Yeah.
I'm bothered.
I want to also create space for the sisters because we getting real hype.
I'm bothered by how powerful I think white spaces is being framed here. In a way, white spaces are not galaxies. They, in fact, are not prisons. They're not chains in any way. They are conceptual. Yes, they exist, but they can be interrogated. Anything that we can frame and interrogate mentally, we can then reframe and change. We can have it. So when I'm thinking of white spaces and interrogating those, what I want for us to begin to say is first, let's put the W and lower caps in our head. I don't care if you change it here or not, but in your own head, listen, how am I going to maintain my safety and my understanding of myself and my goals for myself in those spaces? Those spaces won't define who I am. I have to work in those spaces. So how am I going to work effectively in those spaces and care for myself when I burn energy in those spaces?
This one is good for Dena. This one is good. This one right here.
Dena, dive in.
Which one?
Rest is resistance.
Right
which
there
is
at the
a
bottom.
brilliant
Rest,
work.
right there at the bottom.
That's you. That's your joint. Where's it at? It left. No.
No. There it is at the top.
Rest is resistance consistently points us to the idea that anti-rest has begun in academia, and it's actually a function of academia. How do you sit with folks doing graduate school programs who are conditioned to that point where, and it's like anti-rest culture? Sisters, please.
Rest. You know what? Let me just say what needs to be said. Academia is white supremacy on steroids. So let's just start with that as the basis. And once we understand what we're working with, then we understand how to navigate it. That's what my brother said when we started. When we understand what the brokenness is, we know what we need to heal. So while I was in academia, I told myself, I will never end up in a place like this, but I didn't listen to myself. I think what happens is we need to redefine what success is. We have decided that institutions will save us, one. We decided that these institutions validate us. But if we shift, and we also give these institutions power. So once we shift how we regard certain places, then they lose their power. And I think we need to begin thinking about it, interrogating everything. Because Why do you get to define what success is? Why do you get to define what my expertise is? Like Brother Chris said, I know the smell of sofrito when I walk into a building. Do you? Right? So we have to shift where genius lies. And so I think what has happened is we're like, genius only exists in these institutions. My question is, why did we need doctorates to say and do the things that I've been doing before I had a doctorate? Because someone told me I wasn't worth it, that they won't listen to you if you didn't have your credentials. What if we just existed and decided that we didn't believe or we didn't want to buy into that? And yes, it's easier for me to say on the other side. But trust me, there are scars that got me to this point.
It's also not that hard. Like, I don't want to say, like,
it's not that hard either.
It's like, it's just framed as like it's much more difficult than it actually is. And I think it's because they don't want you to be a part of the joint.
Right.
So the people are going to put barriers in there. Like, at the end of the day, like, you know, a doctorate degree, an EDD program, whatever else it is, like, it's work, but it ain't no harder work than black survival.
At all.
If you really put it in perspective,
Right.
it's not more challenging than your existence.
Right.
It's framed in a way where it's like, oh my gosh, can you ever do it? Oh my gosh, another paper. At the end of the day, it's like, it's light work.
We're better
You just
suited
gotta
to
make
it
the
than
decision
everyone
that
else.
You're not going to let it consume you.
Right.
I think the issue is the consumption. When you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so consumed by this thing. Or like, it's a little paper, I'm writing a little paper, you like it, you don't like it, I do it again. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and this is a part of the things that make you who you are, rather than the chief thing that guides who you are. I want to really go, there's a question about practical examples that I want to get to before we close, but I've not heard Dr. Jones in a minute, and the world is always better when we hear Dr. Jones. So I want to say, how do you push back against admin that don't let you be authentic in your instruction? For example, choosing your curriculum or, you know, or cultural connection. Like, how do you push back against the people who have some power who won't allow you to sort of walk in it?
I think that's when we acknowledge that education doesn't just happen in the classroom.
Yeah.
Right? So especially like as street scholars, as Ratchetdemic scholars, right? Like as public scholars, like what does it look like for us to understand that the education we do for our students can exist and should exist outside of the classroom as well? But that's not to mean I don't expect y'all to still sneak stuff in on the low. Inside the classroom, right? So we were talking about resistance, right? Like our existence is resistant, right? Our persistence is resistance, right? So like we wake up being resistant, right? So I think even you just showing up, even if the curriculum doesn't change, which it should, even you showing up as your authentic self is pushing back against the academy, right? Us existing is us pushing back against the academy, right? But what does it look like for us to show our students all that exists outside of the classroom, both within them and that they can kind of share with other folks? You don't have to educate just within the classroom.
So we got a minute left, and we got a bunch of questions. So I'll say this. If you, we can't get to all of them. Somebody asked about practical examples. I got a whole book on practical examples. Somebody asked about advice, environment. So in the last 55 seconds, this is what I'm gonna do. Do y'all know what hip hop ed is? Where's Tim Jones at? Anybody know what hashtag hip hop ed is? If you don't know, you are tripping.
Oh, he back.
But every Tuesday at 8:15 p.m., except for this Tuesday, because tonight we're gonna be turning up with Big Picture Learning, we have a convening of educators, scholars, thinkers, parents, community members, and we interrogate all these issues. We do it for free every Tuesday with Tim Jones and the rest of the community. I assure you that if we didn't answer any of your questions today, if you just put that question online, type in hashtag hip hop ed, not just me, but somebody in this community will be able to answer those questions in more detail. In the last 15 seconds, can y'all tell these people where they can find you, your work, your books, etc., because they need you in their life?
Sure. You can find me, literally just Google Napoleon Wells. My IG will come up. NapoleonWells.com hasn't launched yet, but it will soon. I'm a science fiction author. Again, look my name up. You'll find any and everything that I do. Department of Veterans Affairs.
Google me, because we have to wrap it up. Just Google all of us and you can find us. Because she's like, keep it. Yeah. Love you all.
No, thank y'all. Tell them about your stuff in your book. We got
Angel
5
Jones,
seconds.
PhD on everything, street scholar, come by.
Catch y'all tonight if you're hanging out with Big Picture Learning. See you on Hip Hop Ed soon. Appreciate y'all for being here. Peace.